It was, without a doubt, the superpower of the ancient world, an empire that literally forged continents, that defined Western civilization, and then, in the most spectacular way, it just collapsed. So today, we're going to dive into the story of Rome's epic rise and its truly tragic ruin.
But here's the thing, this isn't just a story about ancient history, not at all. The story of Rome forces us to ask a question that just echoes through time, a question that feels as real today as it did 1,500 years ago. How does a superpower actually die?
Okay, so to really get a handle on the fall, you first have to understand the unbelievable rise. Let's dig in and see how a tiny city-state on the Tiber River somehow grew into an absolute colossus. I mean, just look at this timeline. It really puts the sheer scale of their rise into perspective, right? We're talking about centuries of growth. It starts with its legendary founding, moves through the whole messy, chaotic era of the Republic, and endures these world-shaking wars like the Punic Wars. And it all leads to this one moment, when Augustus becomes the first true emperor, and the Roman Empire is officially born. You know, this wasn't some overnight success. It was a slow, relentless, and let's be honest, often brutal grind to the very top. So what was their secret? How did they pull it off? Well, it really kind of boils down to this three-part recipe for success. First up, you've got the legions, a military machine that was just unlike anything the world had ever seen. Second, their engineering was pure genius. We still see the ruins of their roads and aqueducts today. And finally, and this is so crucial, a single, unified system of law that brought order to a massive, incredibly diverse population. And all of this success, it led to something truly unprecedented. An era of stability and prosperity so profound, so long-lasting, it was actually given its own name, the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. This was the empire at its absolute, unquestioned peak. For over 200 years. Think about that for a second. 2 centuries. The entire Mediterranean world was pretty much free from any major war, all of it enforced by a single power. It was an environment that allowed for culture and trade and new ideas to just flourish like never before. And the scale of this thing was just staggering. At its height, the empire was home to somewhere around 65 million people. Now, to put that into perspective for you, that was more than 1/5 of every single human being on the entire planet, all living under one government. This era was just defined by these incredible achievements. You had goods, money, and armies moving easily along this amazingly sophisticated road network. You had architectural marvels like the Colosseum being built. For the average person living in the heart of the empire, life was, for the most part, stable, orderly, and pretty predictable. But you know how it goes. No golden age lasts forever. Underneath that shiny surface of peace and prosperity, these deep, dangerous cracks were starting to form in the empire's very foundation. This, right here, was the beginning of the end. Now, what's so fascinating here is the contrast. You can see the decay happening at the very top. The stable, clear leadership of the early empire just devolved into total chaos. In one 50-year stretch, more than 20 different men claimed to be emperor. This chaos was really fueled by one fatal flaw. There was no clear, peaceful way to choose the next guy. Power just went to whoever had the biggest army, and that turned the whole empire into a battlefield for ambitious generals. And this chart, well, this just brilliantly illustrates the economic collapse. See, to pay for all these endless wars, emperors started debasing their coins. What does that mean? Well, essentially, they were melting them down and mixing the valuable silver with cheaper metals like copper. And as you can see, the actual silver in the coins just plummeted. It goes from 95% down to just 5%. This caused insane runaway inflation, making people's life savings totally worthless and grinding trade to a halt. So, the crucial takeaway here is this. The empire was rotting from the inside out. With a completely broken political system and a totally ruined economy, it just didn't have the strength anymore to defend its enormous borders from the growing pressures on the outside. All right, let's get to the final act and see how this all builds to a dramatic and, yeah, probably inevitable collapse. Those cracks we talked about, they became a chasm, leading to a cascade of failures that the Western Roman Empire simply could not survive. This timeline really shows you just how fast everything unraveled at the end. I mean, after centuries of absolute dominance, the unthinkable starts to happen. First, a catastrophic military defeat. And then, the city of Rome itself is sacked, not once, but twice. The eternal city was no longer safe. And then finally, in 476 CE, the final blow lands.
So what were the fatal blows that finally brought it all down? Well, first, as we saw, it was the political rot. The government had become so corrupt, so unstable, that it couldn't even manage its own affairs, let alone a vast empire. Then you have the economic ruin, crippling taxes, worthless money, and the complete breakdown of trade. It all starved the empire of the resources it desperately needed just to function, let alone defend itself. And finally, the nail in the coffin, constant, overwhelming pressure from foreign invasions. These so-called barbarian tribes didn't just defeat Rome, they moved in and literally carved up its territories, dismantling the Western Empire piece by painful piece. But here's the thing, the story doesn't really end with the fall. It's incredible, but Rome's legacy is all around us, like a ghost that still shapes our modern world in some really profound ways. Think about it. The languages we speak, Italian, French, Spanish, our legal systems, with ideas like innocent until proven guilty. Our architecture, even our very ideas of government, like a republic or a senate, so many of these things have their roots deep in ancient Rome. It laid the very foundation of Western civilization, and that's a legacy that massively outlived the empire itself.
Which brings us right back to where we started, but with a whole new sense of urgency. When we look around today at political division, at economic instability, at all the external pressures, we have to ask ourselves, are we listening to the echoes of history? Or are modern civilizations, in their own unique ways, maybe repeating Rome's mistakes?
If you loved this video you just watched, please consider to like, share, and subscribe.